Well, thank you again for joining us. We have a great session lined up for you today. It is slightly different than what was described in the agenda, but it will be very valuable nonetheless. So I'm excited to introduce you all to our esteemed panel that we have joining us today, including Sada Kupsad, who's a principal architect at Microsoft, Cameron Curtis, who leads product management for Teradata, Alex De La Rue, who is also principal architect at Microsoft, and Daniel Tian, who is the chief architect for the Americas at Teradata. All right, and today we are going to be, Sada and Cameron are actually going to be leading us off on the technical value of Teradata on Azure. Alex is going to walk through some of the platform level integrations that we have co-developed with Teradata. And then finally, Daniel is going to close us out by providing a perspective on how customers are leveraging the value of our combined platforms to drive meaningful outcomes. And we will save plenty of time at the end for Q&A. But again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I will hand it off to my colleague, Sada.
How many, real quick, at this stage in a conference, like how excited are people to be at the conference, at the, kind of the end state, right? So we're going to be saving time at the end for Q&A, but would really encourage you to think up the most difficult questions. How can you really give the brain power, myself excluded, up on the stage that you have in front of you? They're here to help you. So if you want to like give them a hard time by like playing stump the chump, or have them say, I don't know, I'll get back to you later, that's when you know you're winning. So please bring it.
Yeah, let's keep it exciting, folks. Go team.
Thank you, Jessica and Cameron. Yeah, these are hot seats, so let's keep them hot. Anyways, so hi everybody, Sada Kupsad, and I'm going to talk to you about why Azure is the best platform out there to host Teradata's workloads. Thank you. So let's go into why that's the case. We've had a very long partnership with Teradata, hosting Teradata's workloads on Azure. Azure has one of the biggest footprints out there. If you look at it both from a breadth perspective or from a depth perspective or any other perspective, you'll always find that Azure wins out. And if you look at the sheer number of regions that are available in Azure, over 70, and not many people know this, but Microsoft has its own underground, undersea cables that connects various regions. And these are not third-party operated. These are not licensed. These are Microsoft-owned infrastructure that interconnects the various regions through undersea cable. This allows us to provide some unique breadth of services. So not just from the region's perspective, but even if you look at the number of services that are available, that's a staggering number as well. So now that we've looked at the breadth of Azure, let's look at the depth. Azure is composed of several services, and those services are delivered through racks and clusters and VMs, yes, but every region that you see on the slide previously has multiple zones, what Azure calls as availability zones. There are at least 3 availability zones in most of the region. I would say almost all of the regions have at least 3 availability zones. We are constantly adding more. And these availability zones are nothing but a cluster of data centers that are interconnected with a very low latency, less than 2 millisecond latency between each of these data centers. So you have all these zones, and multiple zones constitute a region, and you have the network that kind of interconnects all those regions. So here's just another quick perspective on multiple availability zones that Teradata's workload leverages, and those availability zones then build into the complete solution to provide resiliency, business continuity for workloads such as Teradata on Azure. Multiple regions, zones, you bring your workload, host them as you please, as you architect, and that constitutes the entire solution. Comes together as the solution that Teradata's work towards implementing for its customers. So that's the underlying breadth, depth, and richness of services. This slide here puts that into perspective. The Vantage Cloud that you see in the white box in the middle is supported by several services that are available in Azure out of the box. So for instance, whether you're talking of AI services, infrastructure services like storage, data fabric, Azure Batch, they all come together to compose what customers see as the final Azure services. So this is what customers get when they deploy Azure, when they deploy Teradata on Azure. With that, I'll pass it over to my buddy.
So whoa, yeah, that's my voice. So this is a little bit of an older kind of quote, but it's what's public, right? So it's shareable in terms of like when we have a Teradata customer that's using our environment, our cloud hosted on Microsoft, because they've got that's how they run their strategic agreements, and kind of what their experience was from an outcome standpoint. So their migration was, from what I'm told, was actually quite smooth and fast, and they got almost immediate benefit in terms of reaction time to be able to make decisions based off the information they had. That turned into, from a supply chain standpoint, just how much money they've saved, which is by far the largest cost driver for any airline, and at the volumes for what is the world's largest carrier. They have some folks here, if you run into them in the hall, but they've got a great story. They've since moved on from this, and this is where, in terms of heading down from the whole message you've been hearing over the course of the conference about moving from the foundational AI on infrastructure, and they're doing things that are not public, but they're moving forward in how they apply that information and putting it to use through AI and agentic means. So you can imagine, just as a starting place, they're happy, and the future's being implemented here, and we'll let the other guys talk about the future.
Is this on? Yes. So let's talk about how we make this happen in Azure, and we'll basically reflect on the deep technical collaboration we've had with Teradata. So I'm a chief architect on the Azure platform. And so we're going to cover how we're enabling that sort of story and getting into the modern approach of delivering value with AI, and how we've built integrations to deliver that. So, where is everybody heading? And by now, since you've been at the conference for a couple of days, it should be pretty clear that a lot of the business value gets unlocked by delivering those agentic solutions, right? So you could try to simplify that as having agents between the enterprise context and the user and enabling complex scenarios. And to do this, there's two pillars that are critical. It's the data layer, having this organization-wide kind of enterprise context that you can bring to those agents at the right time with precision, and then the intelligence layer to be able to bring those agents to life, control them, the operation side of it, and so on. So let's look at the picture from the Teradata platform here with the knowledge platform built on Vantage Cloud with an MCP layer now that really unlocks those agentic scenarios, and then the AI platform with the agent builder and all the tooling available to unlock agents. So the first pillar is the data integration. So being in Azure, we worked with the data factory component of Microsoft Fabric, as well as the standalone service, to make Teradata sort of first-party data source. So we have native integration as a data source, data sink over there to facilitate bringing data from the Azure data sources into Vantage Cloud, creating embeddings and so on to kind of build that enterprise context linked with the rest of your operational data, as well as Purview. So Purview is the Azure, Microsoft solution to do data governance and discovery, apply policies and so on. And we've also have an integration with Teradata to be able to scan the entire Teradata estate, look at PII, discover data, and so on. So that basically brings to the picture an ability to expand the target data sets that you can bring into Vantage Cloud easily and target with your agents. Second part of it is building those agents. So you need LLMs. The integration with Azure and AI Foundry enables you to target the wide catalog of models that we have. We have more than 11,000 models available in Azure. They're basically one click away to be deployed and monitored. So the catalog is there, fine-tuning, the ability to leverage Azure to do the experimentation, development, to kind of sort of figure out, which model to use, test it out, and then deploy it to be highly available at scale in Azure to get back to the slides that Sarah covered, put the model wherever it needs to be in Azure and benefit from the cloud scale. And then, those agents become useful when they take action. So the integration with Azure opening up, logic apps, benefiting from some of the MCP registries that we have in Azure via API management, so that the agent builder can target actions in the Azure ecosystem pretty easily, and for you to start to build things that leverage the data estate, the enterprise context, and then take action wherever your application and systems are if you're running in Azure. And then the last piece of it is also distribution. So you're building those agentic scenarios and model, the ability to deploy some of them in M365 Copilot or Teams to kind of leverage your existing enterprise systems and building on top of this platform. So there's a great story there. We kind of work on all the aspects of it to make sure you can really, unleash the power of the Teradata platform in Azure by having all those built-in, sort of first-party integrations. This is just a summary to kind of, for those that care about the details about what's being built on the data factory side of it. There's also SSIS integration that's out there for some of you that may be running your orchestration using SSIS. We also built a connector with Teradata to enable some large-scale data orchestration. And then I covered Purview already. And quick details on Foundry. Again, a lot of models available, a click away. And just to summarize what I discussed before, but you get unified access, the ability to virtualize basically all the models behind an endpoint and have the flexibility of picking the right model for the job, which is critical when you want to optimize your costs on the systems. Guardrails, tracing, all the things for debugging, monitoring, and scale. And then if you pick the model sold directly by Microsoft, you get extra SLA provisioning, capacity reservation. So when it comes to deliver your agentic solution at scale and you need guarantees of SLAs and throughput and so on, this is a great platform to run on. So with that being said, I'll pass the mic to Daniel to talk about the dream.
Wonderful, thank you. So needless to say, it's fair that I used AI to generate the photo there, because clearly AI is always going to come back with the most positive light that it can. There's three things that I think are going to be really critical as we kind of have this conversation. The first one is around frictionless user experience. At the end of the day, the promise of AI is to make our lives easier. So that's going to be the first thing I want to talk about. The second thing is around agentic enabled. What we're seeing in the market and how we're seeing this evolution of people building sort of single agent applications to now building multi-agent applications and what that's going to actually mean. And at its most fundamental, and where it becomes really exciting for Teradata, and you kind of saw what we on the main stage today, that kind of trusted knowledge piece. So when I think about the frictionless experience, really what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about the kinds of tools that you already have today. So if you're using Teams, this is the Teams environment that I use. You know, I have conversations with all the people I work with. So it's something that's familiar with me. And the chat paradigm, again, something that is familiar to me. And what makes this really exciting about the prospect of this experience that we're building out with Azure is that we can take these paradigms that we already know, we understand, they're intuitive, and it just becomes another little app in there. And you don't even know that it's an AI agent that sits behind it. It just does really clever things for you. Now, what sits underneath this is kind of exciting for the technical people. Well, less so for the business people. But for the technical people, there's sort of Copilot Studio that's doing certain pieces that defines what the agent's going to do. There's Model Context Protocol that is making sure that you're serving up the context that's important. And there's actually a corporate knowledge element to all of this that is really key. And all of these things coming together is actually what's making that frictionless experience. So when you go out and you start building these experiences for your end users, you want to be thinking about how do I meet them where they already are. And the beauty of what we have with Microsoft is it's really easy to meet them where they are because they're already familiar with these tools. The second piece that I think is kind of interesting is this kind of piece around agentic. And when I think around agentic, and when I started down this journey myself, it was really very much a case of me prompting a sort of a co-pilot kind of application. So it was very much an interaction between me and a single agent. And initially that single agent didn't really have anything other than the knowledge that it had learnt as it had been trained. And then we added tools to it and made it a little bit more exciting. And now where we're kind of going with all of this is this idea of really building out specialization. And that specialization needs to be focused back to the kind of outcomes that we're trying to drive. So if we're trying to drive business outcomes, then we want to have that specialization specializing to the business outcomes. But there's going to be technical outcomes and there's going to be different kinds of outcomes that we need to play. And when we look at that specialization, one of the things that is really important that we've learnt as we've gone through this journey is that if we think about the context or the kind of question and answer that we had with the agent, it really became difficult to do lots of things because the context just got longer and longer and longer. And anybody who's tried to prompt engineer anything knows that once you get past about 2 pages, you can't really remember what you wrote in the first page. Well, the LLM's actually no different. It doesn't remember what you wrote in the first page either. The beauty of this agentic kind of frame set is that I have this specialization. So my first node, its only function is to decide what is my second node going to be from a choice perspective. It's going to delegate down, kind of not dissimilar to the management world we live in. There's a manager, they delegate down to expert agents. If you're an expert agent, you have expertise in a particular area. Kind of makes really, gives you the ability to have that focus around what you want. And what I think is really interesting with that then is not only do I now have focus within the agent, but I can now have focus within the model that the agent's using. And most people don't truly kind of think very much around the model. You sit there and you think, I just use whatever is there. I use ChatGPT for blah, 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 because I've got no idea what any of that actually meant. But actually, what that means is you have the ability to say, for some kind of tasks, I need a very sophisticated model. And for other kinds of tasks, I don't need a very sophisticated model. And given that we're all paying for the numbers of tokens that are going through models, that becomes a conversational point that you're going to have at a point in time. So when you look at this picture that we have on the right-hand side here, you'll realize very quickly, whilst I have a lot of Azure models that are running each one of those agents, they don't have to be the same Azure model. And you saw what we showed on the slide a couple of slides back. There's a very rich set of models that we can choose from. And all of them are in one place. They're all serviced by the same sort of endpoints, and it just makes our life easy so that we can actually start to tailor the agentic flows to the actual needs of the purpose. There's going to be some things that we're going to start talking around with architecture. I am an architect by trade, so obviously if it gets a little propeller head, I apologise up front. But the concept of MCP, I'm particularly enthusiastic about. But really what MCP does is it takes context from knowledge repositories and inserts it inside the agent. That's all it does. So what does that mean in real terms? You have some rows in a database, I can select those rows out of a database, and I can give it to the agent so that the agent can now make a decision about the rows that were in the database. That's pretty simple, right? We kind of understand that concept. Where I think we're going to go in the longer term is people are not going to talk about MCP. MCP is going to be a sort of a byline conversation. Not that it's going to go away. It's just going to be expected. It is going to be on every single application, every single knowledge repository will have an MCP capability, and it will be responsible for surfacing information up into the agents that we're building. And why I think this is going to be important is because when you start having multiple agents working together, then we need to be able to make sure each agent gets the information that they need to be able to do the job they want. So that's the first thing that I think that we're going to see from an architectural perspective. The second thing that I think is not really talked about today, but I think it's going to start getting talked about, and this is this concept called agentic memory. If you have all of these people working together, so remember we go back to our analogy of there's the manager who's just allocated work to each of the different team members. But we also realise that on a Monday morning we all get together for a team meeting. A little bit of a collective groan, I know. But actually that team meeting serves a really important purpose. It serves the purpose of agentic memory in a way. It is the memory amongst the group of what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. And when we start getting lots of these agents working together, we're going to start needing to have this concept of agentic memory. Now, I will say to you, this idea in concept is truly in its infancy. If you go out and have a look in the literature, you will find a couple of people out there who are working on it, but not very many. But I can guarantee that we are going to start having to see a way that every time you build an agent, that agent's going to have to be able to contribute back to the memory of the team of agents and contribute back to the memory of the enterprise. So stay tuned on that one. I think you're going to see that a lot. I would imagine this time next year, people will start announcing these sorts of things. And then the last one that I think that is not talked about very much and is kind of near and dear to many of our hearts because we come from a data management background. We work on Teradata platforms. We kind of understand data and the importance of data, is that historically we have built data products for human consumers. And I think human consumers will know how to modify and use the data they want, and they'll complain about the fact that it's not exactly what they want, but they'll get by with it. I think the world of agents is going to be different. How they consume data is in very, very short, sharp measures. They want what they want in 300 to 500 milliseconds, which means that the data product or the shape of the data, the semantic view of the data, if I was to use a term that was used earlier today, is that's going to be really important, that shape meets that agentic need. And if you start thinking about that concept in sort of the evolution of where I think that goes to, is what happens when agents start to modify themselves? What happens to the data products that sit underneath those agents? Do they also modify themselves? So there's kind of this concept that we're playing around with in the world of sort of data management and how we're going to service all of these agents that is really starting to look at what does an AI native data product need to look like, and how does it need to be able to change itself to meet the evolving needs of the agentic use. Again, I think this is something that's very early on, but I wanted to put it into your minds because I think it is important. We need to collectively be thinking about this because there isn't the answers today. But make no mistake, there's a team at Teradata who's working on it. I'm sure there's a team at Microsoft who's working on it. And, you know, we're going to come up with different solutions, and we'd really seek your input if you had thoughts on the idea. The last theme was around trusted knowledge. And I think with trusted knowledge, I come back to a picture that you've seen 100 times before. Layered architectures and how you think about data and how you think about evolving data from left to right to be able to drive trust has been around forever and a day. This picture is not new. The newness of this picture is two things. One, I've color-coded all of the places where Microsoft and Teradata work really tightly together, because we know that there is a huge advantage in our relationship, making sure that we're bringing you what you need. If I start on the left-hand side, bringing data into an environment and acquisition of data. All sorts of capabilities through object storage, through ETL, through streaming technologies that we use out of that Microsoft suite of applications that we looked at before, that is bringing data into a Teradata platform that resides on Microsoft. It scales on Microsoft. It does all of the technologies that are underpinning in Microsoft, everything from VMs to storage to you name it, right? We're using all of those pieces. You don't even need to know about those pieces because we wrap that up as a Teradata service at the end of the day. When we think about taking your raw data, curating that data, and then enriching that data, it also then becomes exciting because you start thinking about all of the technologies that Microsoft gives around machine learning, around generative AI, that can be used for enriching the data. And again, we've gone through and we've built out connections so that you can either be doing the modeling that you want to be doing in Microsoft and then bringing it into Teradata, or you can be running it inside Teradata, all sorts of different ways that we can share the different models and the capabilities. And really, that's a good thing for you as an end consumer of these capabilities, because you need choice. Your businesses are going to be unique, and you need to be able to have the choices to be able to differentiate the way you need to be able to differentiate to get the benefit you need for your organization. And the last piece was really kind of where I started on the frictionless piece. But if you're going to be delivering data out to end users, there's everything from BI capabilities to chatbot capabilities and 100 different things in between that Microsoft has that we've worked tirelessly together to make sure that that is completely seamless as an experience for you. I personally use VS Code to code. I use VS Code to connect to Teradata. I've stopped using a number of different technologies because I just prefer the VS Code experience. It's becoming something that I personally like. It's not going to be for everybody, I get it, but there's capabilities like Teams for people who are more business savvy. There's capabilities like VS Code for people who are code savvy. And there's a whole range of other capabilities. So look for the capabilities that meet your needs, and make no mistake, there's already work being done in making sure that they work seamlessly together. When you kind of bring that into the enterprise-ready realms, there's a lot of pieces that need to happen. You know, I wish sometimes that I did not have to talk security to people, because security is complicated and difficult, like networking, complicated and difficult. And what I love about the cloud experience is it sort of got outsourced to a bunch of people who actually knew what they were talking about. And I don't have to know about it anywhere near as much. But the beauty of being enterprise ready is, regardless of whether you're going to be in the cloud or whether you're going to be on-prem, and how you make these connections, all of that needs to come together. And when I look at the richness of everything from that security of authentication, authorization, through to things like guardrails on models, that capability all seamlessly becomes a click away from your ability to actually make sure that you have the enterprise readiness that you actually need to have. The piece I didn't talk about at the very bottom was that agentic memory. I talked about it a little bit before. Like I said earlier, I don't know how that's going to play out. I think that's probably, in my mind, one of the most interesting areas that I think is going to be in front of us in the next year or two, as we kind of build towards this agentic world that I think is going to be around the corner. Who knows? If you're going to build Skynet, you're going to probably have to have some memory. So my advice is be nice, say please to the models, say thank you to the models, because you never know when they're going to be in control. So how do I think about this all coming together? When I think about this coming together, I think there's going to be a world where there's knowledge repositories. I've shown you one knowledge repository on the bottom, on the right-hand side here. It's not going to be one. It's going to be many. But I'm just going to show you the Teradata one for the moment, right? You can extrapolate to all the other knowledge repositories that you think are going to be there. I think each knowledge repository is going to have capabilities that dictate access to that knowledge. We'll call it MCP for today. It might change names in the future, but today it's MCP. And then I think you're going to see this concept of agents, but different kinds of agents that sit on top of that. I think first layer is going to be sort of more access-based agents, making sure people do have the access that they should be accessing and coming and bringing data together. But I think there's going to be enrichment agents that are going to be responsible for the enrichment of data, taking out, finding the signals in the data, looking for the things that are going to be interesting. Business process agents, way out of my league of truly understanding, but you out there who are business people, you know how your organisation works. You know the steps that you have to go through, and if you're going to start building automations around steps, then business process agents are going to be your play. And then I think the piece that is going to be interesting is where we kind of started right back with frictionless, is that user experience. How do I make sure that that user experience, completely frictionless, completely obvious in how you actually consume it? You didn't even know you were consuming it, is the perfect agent outcome that I can see in the future. So, when I think about these things, I'm really looking at it and going, if I can align it to business outcomes, then I'm going to get funding. And anyone who's out there knows that at the end of the day, if you want to get funding in this day and age, you say AI a lot, right? We get it. I would encourage you to do the same. Tie everything back to AI. There's going to be some benefits there. But the practicality of AI is there is a lot of steps and hoops and learnings that we're going to go through as we kind of evolve into this area. I think the second thing is this concept around agentic frameworks. And when we think about agentic frameworks, I'm really thinking about how do I look at an army of agents? And how do I think about that army of agents working together? Because I think in the longer term, don't think what we're solving for is a single agent. We're solving for lots of agents. So try to think about that as you start to design out your mindsets and your, technology decisions today. What I love about what we're seeing with Microsoft and the experience is that we see everything from Copilot Studio that's already thinking about this. We're thinking about the delivery mechanism at scale. We're thinking about MCP at scale. We're thinking about all of these pieces at scale. And they're thinking that it is not a single agent. It's not a single agent. It is many agents. And the last one that I think is worth talking about is designing for autonomous. I know that we don't trust them yet. Like I said before, we should probably still be nice to them, and I'm talking about LLMs and agents, but we don't trust them. So we're going to put humans in the loop to begin with. But I don't think humans will be in the loop forever. I think at a point in time, they will become autonomous. You will trust them to do simple things initially, and then they'll become slightly more complicated things, and then Skynet will take over the world and kill us all. Sorry, did I say that aloud? Didn't mean to say that aloud. But I think it is going to be important that as you design your agent sets, design them with autonomous in mind. Don't design them with human in the loop in mind, because you need to give yourself a path to making sure that you can get the automations that you're expecting. You can get the decisions and the benefits that you're expecting, and that you can do it at the speed that your executive team is telling you that you need to be able to move at. And that is autonomous. And I think with that, questions? Any questions from anyone?
This is almost an ask me anything kind of moment, because the folks here on stage, well, I'm a theorist, right, and a strategist, but the other three folks are all very deep practitioners and are seriously engaged. So I see one in the back right there. And if you make it a good question, we'll be sure to take care of you afterwards in the best ways.
Daniel, thanks. It was very good, everybody on the panel. Have you successfully implemented MCP and agents? Is there any use cases you guys can talk about that have been successful? I know we're early on in this game, but can you share any of those with us, perhaps?
Certainly from the Teradata experience, from an MCP, yeah, we're running it with a lot of different customers. They have not given me permission to talk with their names at this stage, but there'd be probably 20 or 30 that I'm working with in the Americas, probably a slightly smaller number in Europe, and a smaller number again in APAC. And really what we're seeing is most of the customers are sort of dipping their toe in. The most advanced ones have really embraced the MCP capabilities and the single agent capabilities, and they've got real value out of that. I have a couple of customers who are right at the precipice of pushing the buttons to go production, but as you all know, being technically ready and being politically ready is sometimes two different things, so, you know, we have to kind of work through. One of the biggest challenges that I am seeing is that a lot of organizations have got AI policies, and I encourage you to have an AI policy. And AI policies, in my experience, certainly at Teradata, went from being really strict to a lot less strict and a lot more engaging in trying to get value. I see the same sort of thing going on with a lot of other companies. But yeah, there's a lot going on out there. Most people are starting with sort of smaller ideas. I have a lot of people who are starting with very technical, sort of like even automation of DBA kind of activities as an example. But where it becomes more interesting is when it is automation of business process. We have those. I'm just not really allowed to talk about them yet.
And I want to encourage you to ask Cameron a very complex question. I will pay you.
I just wanted to add a little bit on that from a Microsoft perspective. Again, I can't name customers, but to your question about using MCP, right? So we've seen customers starting to, and I guess to your last point, Daniel, when you start to get on that journey, what's important is to take care of responsible AI in mind from the get-go, to understand if I'm going to have agents that interact between the business users and my business applications, right? I'm going to have to define where is the liability going to be, make sure the end user is aware that AI is in the middle. They need to validate things and maybe approval at some point because you may not have the accuracy that you want. So we highly encourage to start any project with like risk analysis, right? And then defining what am I going to be paying attention to, measuring, conveying liability into the process so there's clarity about decisions. But then we've seen our customers try to tackle the friction that's currently present in the tooling that the business users have. For instance, an ERP system that is very complex to use, and say that's a good place to have an agent in the way, have some MCP capability on top of the ERP to start to enable some scenarios via chat, right? But again, you want to do this properly. But we start to see quite a bit of traction in there to look at systems that are very complex because they're legacy, built 20 years, 1 million features, and analyze, okay, what do people actually use it for, and target those first scenarios as a narrow use case that's high value, that's a good way to kind of get started.
As you mentioned, one of the goals of agentic AI is to manage business processes. Each business process has certain performance requirements in response time and throughput, etc. And agentic AI request going through multiple layers, orchestrations, RAG, LLM, vector store. So can you give us an example of applying observability to analyze responsiveness and usage of resources during processing, during each agent, and different agents work differently, multiple agents supporting specific business process. Can you give us maybe example of implementing observability in agentic AI environment to be sure that at the end of the day, agent will support business process performance requirements? If you need sub-second response time and you provide 5-second response time, there is no reason to talk about cost. So, and observability play an important role here. So can you give us an example how it's implemented?
Yeah, happy to take that. Yeah, so that's a critical piece of the equation, right? Because you are dealing with systems that get complex, that are now deterministic, right? You got the LLM piece, the API calls, the databases, and so on. So the concept you see in this industry is the concept of leveraging an AI gateway so that you can define the logic of the agents as mostly prompts and very little code. And everything goes through the AI gateway. So what the AI gateway responsibility is to give you access to the models, take care of the logging of basically everything there, and give you the granularity of what's going on, right? So AI gateway being a router to the MCP layer, to the LLM, to a database, and then tracking all of those things. So in Azure, this will be implemented using the API management platform. That has a lot of stuff even around security and guardrails, so you can apply policies that are global for your enterprise and how you want to track agentic solutions. That gets logged to in Azure Log Analytics, and then we have a tracing capability for you to review every single interaction, to see the flow going from one agent to the other, from one agent to a tool, see the time spent, and then the tokens, the cost. So you can implement like a FinOps solution on top of it as well to understand what is the cost of every request that I make. Is it optimal? Is it optimal? To your point, Daniel, earlier, this is where you get into, okay, am I using the right model? Maybe my latency is too high. I'm not delivering on the performance of that business process. You'll be able to see that and then do experimentation and compare. So it's a critical piece of the equation, and the advice is not to build that at the enterprise level. In Azure, it would mean look at API management. We have basically an AI gateway pattern with a lot of best practices and integrated tooling to take care of that, so that the developers can just focus on the business process definition, the prompt, and everything from security to tracing to cost management is basically policy-based and the same for the enterprise. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. So just to add to that, cloud providers provide services that have different costs attached to them, and generally, the model provider or the service provider ends up absorbing those costs to answer the prompt. And it's not always the case that you need sub-second responses. Sometimes there is a trade-off between the response time and the cost incurred. And that's where services that cloud providers provide around flex capacity, flexing the infrastructure to scale up or scale down to control costs. And with the end user's agreement, you're able to offer or respond to the same prompt maybe in 5 minutes at a lower cost versus sub-seconds at a significantly higher cost, and provide that option to the end user through the monitoring tools that my peers just talked about. You have those metrics that allow you to provide options to customers.
terms of examples, did you attend the yesterday's keynote? And Jillian came up and talked about
Yes.
the 1 Teradata. So if you think about what these two guys just said around how to get the performance and price and accuracy details that you want, the tools are in the toolkit mostly. There's more to evolve. Philosophically, I think we're going to be moving into an age where agents are treated as applications, and so far they're kind of not. It's so easy to build and create something that talks back to you and to give it the information, but to get the level of reliable, performance-based output that you can trust to be autonomous will require using all of the tools. Everything that Alex just said, all of the scaling and have the visibility at each stage of the journey, which means that it's probably going to be a human's job to start to be a combination of agentic creator and architect and business process person all combined into one that will then be able to evolve the agents or tools over time. And the reason that I'm saying this is because, go back to what yesterday's in the UX, the 1 Teradata, we're using our MCP server as the front end to create the front end of our new user experience. To do that, that enables us to leapfrog all the little nooks and crannies of our consoles and our CLI and all the stuff that was amazing in 2002 and is still important to the platform, but is not accessible unless you have a PhD in Teradata. And I'm not going to do that. But I'm so happy to leverage these tools that we're talking about to have a reliable experience. And I'm so happy to know that my friend Jillian, who was on stage presenting, is building in the telemetry as in the application, or the team is building in the telemetry, because the response time that you want, because we're building this front end, right? The response time you want from that tool has to meet somebody who's got a master's degree in Teradata, right? And they're using the tool to help them. They don't want to wait 5 seconds or 50 seconds to get an answer. That's going to be a fail from the experience. So there's a create it, and then I think there's going to be a significant amount in almost every agentic case of tuning over time. And that's not yet an agentic. There will be agents for that someday, but that's not a fire and forget. That is create something and manage it. I think there's going to be a real pivot point in the industry around the data scientists who are so excited to create something and build it, and they don't want to run it. That's a pain in the backside. Who wants to get better? So we're going to see humans that are kind of the agentic equivalent of a site reliability engineer, who are all about taking a $1,000 a day cost of run for an application, for an agentic application, and turn it into $100 a day and improve, kind of like quality performance from 99.9% to 99.9999, right? And then we will have autonomous. This is like my extrapolation of all the kind of strategic things that we're seeing and we're all seeing, but that's how. And the example of we have to do that internally because we're building a product with our friends. That was a great question, by the way.
Yeah, I think you're touching on the one thing that I talked about a little bit before. Like, you call it telemetry. I think I called it agentic memory. Like, I really am looking at this world and thinking, how do I look at all of the layers in the stack that are doing things, and how do I keep an understanding of that? Because that telemetry is triggering other agents. That telemetry is telling me that I did this kind of lineage change to a set of data. That telemetry is doing so many different things, and precisely why I think this agentic memory is going to be such a critical element.
Thank you very much for coming, everyone. It's been a great afternoon, a great session. Thanks for listening to us. I hope you learned something.
Thank you.